Awesome. So this event has been a long time coming. Jacob, as well as actually a number of our friends, have enjoyed Roger's puzzles for quite some time. You have a little bit of a cult following among certain groups of nerdy mathematicians, and so we're excited to have you today to talk about it. And I'm just going to hand the control over to Jacob, who is going to be running today's event.
Perfect. Thank you, Max. Sorry, I already did some of the introductions because I got too excited, but Roger made this wonderful book I'm holding up, which is probably hard to see since I'm not screen sharing right now. But it's about cave puzzles. And besides doing all these fancy mystery hunt things, being a grandmaster puzzle solver, going to do math at Harvard and stuff, we're talking about cave puzzles today because I got this book at the start of COVID and made a promise to myself that I wouldn't reach out to Roger to ask him to come speak to Computation Club, despite how excited I was, until I finished them. So after about 2 years of work, we finally did it. And it's going to be sort of a free form discussion. So people feel free to jump in, especially because I think I'll be excitable and have enough questions that I'll just fill the entire time otherwise. So don't feel bad about interrupting at all. And yeah, with all that being said, thank you, Roger, for coming to speak with us today.
No problem, Jacob. Happy to be here. I love puzzles. I love talking about puzzles and making puzzles. Although, as you say, I am a mathematician by trade, I'm probably more interested in puzzles than math. So, any excuse to talk more about puzzles and a little bit about math is a good one for me. So,
Yeah.
yeah, please, folks, ask whatever questions you have. Happy to talk about the process of solving, of creating, of competing, because I've competed in puzzle competitions too for many years, and they're all interrelated to various degrees. I mean, one of the things I can talk about is I think becoming a better solver makes you a better constructor, becoming a better constructor makes you a better competitor, etc. It's sort of a loop of gaining familiarity with puzzles in general and particular puzzle types.
Yeah, that is amazing, and I hope we can get into some of those things soon. I was thinking to start us off, I could actually share a very quick JavaScript program that I fixed what ChatGPT made because I hate JavaScript, but want something for the website. So yeah, I'm just going to share this in the chat right now. You can also find it on our site
Jacob, you,
homepage.
you can share a screen if you want. I made you
Oh,
co-host.
I will. Yeah, I'll do that in a
Okay.
second. But Roger, what I was thinking is as I set this up with the first puzzle in your book, which I think you said was okay for us to share, would you
Sure.
mind, as I'm setting all that up, talking about some of the rules of cave puzzles and sort of what that's about, any history about how you found these or why you wanted them? And then by the time you're done with that, we can just try to solve one in real time so people can get the gist of how it works.
Sure, sounds good. Right. So, cave is a genre of logic puzzle, right? And when I say logic puzzle here, I mean a grid logic puzzle, like a Sudoku. It tends to be the grid logic puzzle that people are most familiar with. There exist hundreds, if not thousands, of different genres of these grid filling puzzles, some of which involve putting numbers in a grid, or maybe drawing a loop in a grid, or shading certain squares and unshading certain squares, which is what's actually going to happen in cave puzzles. So probably like everybody else, I did get started with Sudoku. That's sort of the first logic puzzle you're ever going to run into. This was, a long time ago, back in the days before Sudoku was a household name. But I did find it, on some obscure Japanese website in the 90s, back when website was even sort of an obscure concept, at the risk of sounding too old. And Yeah, right. I liked it. I started doing a lot of Sudoku and trying to find as many of these other different kinds of logic puzzles you could find. Sort of used to be hard to find them again in the pre-internet days. Most of these came from Japan, like Sudoku itself, which is why I had many of them have Japanese inspired names. They used to be a little bit hard to find in the US. You had to search down paper copies here and there. But Cave, which was a Japanese invention, uh, it also went under the name Corral for a while, and actually Bag for a while. You can find it under all three names if you search. It was used in the U.S. Puzzle Championship for a few years, which is a tournament that an annual tournament that the U.S. has been holding for a while to choose its representatives to go to the World Puzzle Championship. And that's where I ran into this puzzle for the first time. And it's hard to say what particular tickled me about it compared to other shading puzzles, loop puzzles, logic puzzles, but I took to it. And then I eventually, it's funny because it probably started with writing a solver for it. So I coded up a solver for it. In my mind, coding up a solver and coding up a constructor are very close to the same thing. And we'll talk about why that is. So by the time I had built a good solver for it, I sort of felt like I had a good constructor for it. And I started making some of these puzzles, and I'd made plenty of other logic puzzle types before. But this particularly grabbed me to the point where I just found myself making more and more and more of them. And then suddenly I had 100, and I said, wow, I should really actually try to get somebody to solve some of these. Because for the most part, I was just making them and storing them in directories where no one was ever going to see them. I talked to a publisher, and that's how the book came to be. But let's talk a little bit about the rules of the puzzle, right? So it starts with a grid. I traditionally use 10 by 10 grids. That's just for tradition reasons. There's no particular reason it has to be 10 by 10. A grid of numbers, with the idea being that you're going to shade some cells to form what we call the rock, and everything that is unshaded is the cave. And there's a couple rules that constrain that. So the first rule is that all of the given numbers have to be unshaded. They have to be part of the cave. They can't be part of the rock.
And Roger, just to
The
interrupt, I can start showing this as we go through right here. So for example, all the numbers are white, which means they are part of the cave. This gray is an in-between. We don't know what it is. But for example, this would be saying, look, here's a rock. So this is what we're sort of filling in. And please direct me to do whatever visual demo makes sense as you explain, because we can just do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. And that's how the programs treat them. You're sort of in one of these three states. You're known open, you're known rock, or you're in this indeterminate state. Right. So there's rules about the shape of the cave. So in particular, all of the cave has to be connected in one horizontally and vertically contiguous block. So yeah, you should be able to illustrate that, Jacob. So that's in this
This one's
scenario, I'm
allowed.
actually talking about the white part has to all be connected,
Oh,
right?
oh,
So
right. Sorry.
no, you're right. So you must connect all the white cells in such a way that it's all one contiguous block. You can never have black cells that sort of form a complete line across the grid and cut off certain white cells from other white cells. You have to be forming one contiguous cave.
Yeah.
That's one rule. Also, that cave can have no loop, can have no islands of rock within it. So there's a couple different ways to think about that constraint.
Yeah.
Right.
Something
So
like
like
this would not be allowed. You can't have
that would
any
not be allowed.
other cave
That's
section
right.
for many reasons, but yeah.
A section of
Since
cave that doesn't connect to anything else. Yeah, go
since
ahead, Max.
you can't have any gray when you're done, right? And therefore the rule for white is dual to the rule for black. Either one would be sufficient to get the same outcome. Like if all the whites are contiguously connected, oh no, the blacks might not be continuous, right? There could be they could be partitioned. That's the issue.
That's right.
Yep.
Well, really, what you don't, the blacks are allowed to be partitioned. Only the whites need to
Okay,
be in one contiguous block. But what must be
got
true
it.
for the
Okay,
blacks is that every black cell must be able to get to the edge via a contiguous path of black cells. What you can't have is a black cell in the middle of a bunch of white. That would sort of be
got
a
it.
freestanding island of rock, and that's not allowed. So you have
Right. So
one
if we
contiguous
pretend,
blob of white surrounded by rock.
yeah, so if we pretend that forget the numbers, that rule Roger hasn't explained yet, just pretend all the grays are white. This is a valid configuration of black, where the white is not disconnected. But if I were to do something like this would not be allowed because this cave or the rock piece needs to always be touching an edge. So if you're doing a puzzle and you find out that something over here is a rock, then you know that this has to have some path that connects to an edge, and diagonals don't count. So this would not be, yeah. But yeah, please continue, Roger. Just thought would be helpful.
No, that's exactly right. And that will be an important solving strategy as you start to do these. As Jacob says, you're going to find you have rock, and you're going to want to make sure that rock doesn't get isolated. Make sure it gets to an edge, and the converse. When you have these little pieces of white, you want to make sure they don't get isolated. Make sure they connect to other stuff. Right. So really, the final thing is the numbers. Right. We haven't yet talked about why there are numbers in some of these cells. So the number tells you how many white cells you can see from that cell looking directly horizontally and vertically, with your view blocked by rock and the edge of the board. Ooh, a question
Just
about
for
on
example.
a sphere. I have seen toroidal examples, and things can get very confusing if you don't allow the edge of the board to be a blocker. But for a traditional puzzle, right, as Jacob has drawn, that 2 in the upper left, if the square to the right of it is white, now sees exactly 2 squares. You do count the square itself, so that would be a valid configuration of the 2. Whereas if that black wasn't there, if it was some other way, right, that's not good because the 2 now only sees 1 cell. And it's similarly not allowed for the 2 to see too many cells, right? Like in this instance, the 2 would see 4 cells, and that's not allowed either. So you have to make sure that each of the given numbers, in addition to being white itself, sees exactly the correct number of white cells before being obstructed by rock or the edge of the grid. And I think that's it in terms of the rules. So then the question, it is always true that each well-constructed puzzle has a unique solution. So can you find the unique solution from the givens? So should we solve through this together, Jacob, or should I tell you
Yes,
how
yeah,
I would
let's solve
approach
through
it?
this one. And I'd like to say
Uh,
empirically that Roger's puzzles all are unique because I was really hoping there would be some mistake somewhere and I could show him later, but there were not any. And every time I thought I found one, we're like, look, it's indeterminate. It turned out I was wrong. Um, so yeah,
Well,
do these
that's
rules,
we can
yeah,
thank the power of computers there. That these were all computer aided in construction and checking, as we'll talk about, and computers don't make a ton of mistakes.
okay, perfect. So
But
it'll make more sense as we get started, but does anyone have any quick questions about any of the rules, any confusion so far?
So my intuition is that the place to start is either the top right or top left corner, because those seem very well constrained. Is that a good intuition?
it's a reasonable intuition, right? Looking at places where there's a lot of numbers next to each other. For example, you can do something, and this would be a little bit more advanced than we would usually do at the start. But even from the 2 in the upper left, Jacob already showed there's essentially only 2 legal configurations for the 2, right? Either it goes 1 to the right and then stops, or it goes 1 down and then stops. What's interesting is that in both of those configurations, the third square it's going to have to hit, remembering that all of the cave has to be connected, is that square that's one down and 1 over from the corner. That square right there. So in any possible configuration of the 2 in the upper left corner, that square has to be white. So we can know for sure that that cell is white just from the presence of the 2 and its location in the corner there. Again, that's sort of an advanced trick. A beginning puzzle like this, you don't have to do things like that in order to solve it, but it's something you can do. I will say the way, if I was looking at this puzzle, the place I would attack is the bottom left, particularly that 12 and 4 next to each other. So I might ask, why is it interesting to have a very large number and a very small number in the same row?
Yeah, the 12 and 4, for example. So that's a great question. If anyone has any idea about some squares we can solve, either as cave or rock in this corner due to the relationship between these two, like Roger was saying, and I'll wait a second and then jump into an answer.
I believe that the to the right of the 12 should be white.
Like this.
Think about that. Yes.
I think that's correct. Do you want to say why?
So because the grid is 10 by 10, we know that the sort of the worst case scenario. So if we maxed out the vertical, if the vertical was all white, there's still 2 left over. So no matter how you configure horizontally, you're gonna need the one to the right to be white to have enough.
Right, because this configuration would be invalid, is what you're saying,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yep, exactly right.
That is a more
Sorry, I don't understand why that configuration is invalid.
So
because
if
you
you
only
count
reach
up the
11.
12, you have 10 on the vertical plus 1 horizontally. So this would add up to
Oh,
11
okay.
total that it can see. Does that make sense?
Oh,
So
yeah, I thought the black square was in a bad spot, but no, it's just because it's only 11.
yes, exactly. So this is already an example of sort of a contradiction argument. And I think this is sort of a linear search that is a good technique that Jared discovered where if you have numbers like the 14s and 12s and stuff stick out to me, or things where you're next to a smaller number, because it helps you. If you go max in some way, you can try to get a contradiction. So perfect. So we know that this one's white. We don't know about these ones, which I just added in the vertical as a hypothetical, but we do know about this one through the special technique Roger showed us. Yeah, does anyone see any interesting next steps from realizing that the 4 and 12 are connected?
So I would ask, if you look at the cell above the 4, could it be white or black?
I'm thinking above the 4 has got to be clear or to the right of 4, which means up and left of 4 and up and right of 4 would have to be white. Does that sound fair?
So you're saying these two would have to be white? And that would imply
I
that the one
don't
in the middle has to be white
think
too, right?
so. Yes, it would, and that would be problematic.
Because now the 4 can see 5 total.
Right. Yeah, I think that was just posted in the chat that the one above the 4 must be black, in fact, because otherwise the 4 sees too many squares.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this one does have to be black because otherwise the 4 sees too much.
Yeah.
No, but it's okay. We'll get to it soon. It's really unintuitive at first, which is part of the reason I love these problems so much, is because I start out with them and I see no intuition, and you can keep finding these tricks that it feels like each step makes sense, but you can't really predict multiple out at once. So I think this is sort of an interesting thing to keep exploring, because every choice we've made so far in this bottom corner has actually yielded new tricks for us to do. So first we found out these were connected. Then we found out the 4 is limited vertically. Is there anything else we can tell about these guys here before we continue on somewhere else? And Roger, please take over if you'd like to do the solving of your
No,
own
you're
puzzle.
doing great. You're doing great. For example, how many white squares total is the segment on the bottom row going to be that includes the 12 and 4?
And a bound is totally fine as well. But I guess here we know the exact number. Could we have
I can
this, for example? Right, we're somehow limited. We couldn't have this.
I see there's a radius around the 4. That's why you can start to bound things.
you want to avoid that 4 seeing too many squares. And in fact, we now know the 4 doesn't see any squares vertically. So we know it sees 4 squares. They all have to be horizontal. So it has to be contained in a horizontal width section of exactly 4. We don't know where it is. Could be one to the left of those 3 or one to the right of those 3. But it has to be exactly 4 white cells bounded by black cells on either side. So we know a lot about that area from the 4, and now how can we use that knowledge to inform what the 12 is going to look like?
So we know that the 12 needs to have a bunch of white squares above it, because the 4, like that row, can't have that many that the 12 sees. So
That's
there's going to be
exactly right.
4. And I guess there'll be exactly 4 that the 12 sees in its row. So its column needs to have 9, and then the one to the right of the 2 needs to be black.
Yes.
That's exactly
Nice.
right.
Yeah, so interestingly, let's notice how we reused Jared's trick about trying to get the 12 to see too much by forcing all vertical and to the left and saying, oh, look, you still need this square to the right to be white. And then we did it the other direction, where we said, at most you can go 4 across. So we need to go all the way up this way. And then Daniel said, hey, look, there's a cap up here. So we talked about how the 2 in the top left has only 2 configurations available. So now we can see how this one would be forced. Would anyone like to tell me what these squares in here are like? or I'll just fill it in. Right, that would be forced.
Wait, I missed something very basic. Does the square with the number count as one of the squares? In other words, can the two
Yes,
in the top left see two at the moment?
it does.
Yes.
They
Okay.
see themselves too. So
Okay.
if you don't want to count the square, you need to look at what the number is, subtract 1, and then that's all the horizontal and vertical it gets to
Got
see.
it.
And the number to the left of 12, the square to the left of 12 should be clear? Is that what we were deciding?
Well, it's either that or the one to the right of the 4.
It could be clear if this one's dark,
Sorry,
or
I
this one
forgot.
could be dark with this one being clear like this.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, nice.
Nice puzzle, Roger. I don't know
Yeah.
where you came up with this approach, but I like this.
Yeah, good
Very
job.
nice.
I will point out, speaking of, as Jacob said, about introducing new rules, we can return to one of the things we said earlier that we haven't really looked at yet. So if you look at that black square above the 4 now, remember when I talked about what the overall shape of the puzzle must look like, I said all the white has to be connected and all the black squares need to be connected via other black squares to the edge. So now looking at that black square, does that tell me anything about where additional black squares have to be?
I see. So it
Okay,
seems to me you're going to have a right angle that's going to get you back down, which means that your additional white will be the bottom left corner, right?
No, not
I mean, it's
That's
maybe
the
not the only.
fastest way
You
to the
could
grid,
send
but
it
that's
two to the
not the
right.
only
Okay.
way to the edge.
I think
You-
I think I know. Can I try?
Go for it.
Go for it.
I think it would be black to the right of where you are, and then right below that.
So the first statement is correct, right? We need to have a black
Okay.
to the immediate right of the other black so we can sort of escape from that little dead end that we had
From the
trapped
dead end.
ourselves in.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, but it could go off to the right and connect
Correct.
anywhere else to an edge. Okay, all right,
Right.
okay.
Could go something
Correct.
like this, all the way to
Yeah,
this.
okay.
But yeah, this first
By the way,
episode, 'cause
Jacob, great job coding this up. I would have 100% made something buggy if I'd put this together so quickly.
Very nice.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you guys like it. But yeah, we can prove what Roger's saying by contradiction. Let's just pretend this square was white. Now this is trapped, right? This can never reach an edge and we don't have a valid puzzle. So yeah, it was a nice time to introduce the new trick where we can get a little bit over here.
Yep.
And yeah,
Can
this
I
is one
ask
of the...
oh, sorry.
No, go for it, Jared.
I wanted to ask a general question about the structure of these puzzles, and maybe I'm like jumping the gun because I assume we're going to talk at some point about like how these work in general. But are there ever situations where you have I guess a well-formed puzzle basically has exactly one solution, right? Are there ever situations where in a well-formed solution, there's a white cell that none of the numbered cells can see?
Yes. Good question. Yes, that can wind up forced by the connectivity constraints, right?
Right,
Because there's
right.
this constraint that the white cells all have to be connected. You can actually, as a constructor, you can use that to force specific cells to be white, such as to provide a bridge, say, between two other regions of white, even with no numbers present. And that can actually be a show-off constructor trick sometimes, is you'll see puzzles with like with a scarcity of numbers. Maybe there's no numbers in the middle, there's no numbers in certain region, and at first you think, well, that can't lead to a unique solution. It appears highly unconstrained in this area, but if you constructed it just right, maybe there's exactly one path through there to connect two other groups of white, and you get a bunch of white cells that are not pointed to by any number. So that can definitely happen.
Yeah.
Usually in a harder puzzle.
Yes, it is a good question. So how are people feeling right now? Do we feel like we're getting a sense of how this works and we should just go a bit faster and we can kind of see this get solved and then we can start constructing different examples and talk about, I think it was Jared, what you just asked, and ask Roger some other questions, or do we want to keep doing this collaboratively until we get to it? There's a fast mode and slow mode.
I have a feeling I'm going to have even more trouble preparing for finals now. So thank you. You've ruined my weekend.
I
would
have
happy
an
to help.
idea.
I would be interested
of
in seeing these solved if it's not going to take too long. Like
See
collaborative.
just okay, keep going. Keep going the how we have. All right,
So-
perfect.
we need to have like
Yeah.
at least these white, because like this column can have at most 8, and so then kind of like to have the 14 see 6 of them. I miscounted. You don't need I miscounted that, but like
No, you're right.
you
8
know, to
vertically.
the
No, you're
14
right.
has
You're
to see
right.
at least 6, and so like the worst case would be like this,
Mhm.
and
So we know this
so
one has to be white.
yeah.
Great use of
Yeah,
the
that's
drawing
exactly
tools. I
right.
did not think about this. Everyone else, please do that too.
And,
Does it?
and it illustrates a point I want to make is I think it's interesting how the deductions propagate, right? We made a deduction down near the bottom about this black square and it needed to escape. It sort of didn't really look at first like it was connected to anything else in the puzzle. You might have thought, all right, well that didn't actually move us forward at all. But it did, for the reason Daniel exactly pointed out. It limited the options of the 14, which is actually pretty far away, but still, because 14 is a pretty large number, it's pretty constrained, and it shows us, I think we get 2 more white cells on either side of the 14 based on that logic.
Right, so 8 vertical, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. This one has to be white. Yeah,
And one
no,
more to the right.
Oh, one more to the right, right. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So
Exactly.
yeah, great find. And yeah, it is really
Yep.
interesting, as Roger was saying, that all of these things we discovered come from this first square, right? Like this allowed us to connect these two, which let us know this one had to be closed, which let us know that the 12 would go up this way, which forms enclosed region. So the rock needs to escape, which caused the 14 to have space on either side here. But yeah, that's partly why I think they're so fun and why this feels like discovering math to me in a way, because yeah, the next steps are always deducible but never predictable. So that's one thing I really like about them. So thanks for pointing that out, Roger. Does anybody else want to draw some things up and see if they see
What-
anything?
I've made
One
a
observation.
Go
I
ahead,
was just going to
because I
say
can't
that
find
one very small observation is that when I first saw the puzzle, I thought that symmetry was going to help us a lot. But actually, my intuition is that that's really not true. That the numbers have a much bigger impact than the placement, and the symmetry is not really going to do very much for me at all. Is that more or less correct?
Yes, I think that is correct. And we'll talk about, when we talk about the constructing part of it, a lot of the constructing, a surprisingly large amount, much like it is for crossroads, is about aesthetics and trying to make the grid look pretty. So things like symmetry of givens, or you may have observed in this fact that in this puzzle that all the givens were even. There's no reason that has to be. It actually isn't going to matter that much for the purpose of solving. Again, it's sort of more of a flair thing, and sort of makes the puzzle more visually interesting to look at. So yeah, it can be interesting that the layout of the numbers, even the identity of the given numbers doesn't have a lot to do with how the puzzle solves. The puzzle really pins on these very specific interactions between pairs of adjacent numbers and stuff like that.
Yes, and to corroborate what Robert is saying, or what Roger is saying, and from your question, Max, I tried very hard to actually, before writing anything down on the puzzle, imagine what shape the solution would look like, even if I didn't get it quite right. And I gained no intuition despite working on this for a couple of years. So maybe someone smarter or more talented in some way could, but I struggled with that. All right. What should we do next on here?
I have one more deduction.
Nice.
So if this cell is black, then this adds up to 8, which means that this will have to be white to appease the 10, which would then be too many for the 10. Which means that this must be white. And I don't think there's anything more that we can, like, I don't think we can then go out to this one. I think that's still gray. And we also can't yet confirm that this is black. So I think like that's all the deduction you can do right away.
Perfect. That's a nice contradiction argument. Great job.
Yeah, thinking about them in terms of contradiction is like immediately very useful. And I feel like it's a little different from like, I'm no Sudoku expert. I've done it a little bit, but it feels like Sudoku, I haven't found it as keen on like thinking about it in terms of contradiction. You just sort of narrow down and narrow down, but you never think about it like backwards, so to speak, as much. So this is very interesting to see how the contradictions come in.
Yeah, and this comes up a lot in the more challenging puzzles. Maybe there are ways to do like broader thematic things about the board, but that was how I solved a lot of them, just staring at it for a long time until you find a weird contradiction. Are there any easier low-hanging fruits we can try to find at other regions
I
of the
think
puzzle?
there's another contradiction that proves that this one is not black, because if it were black, then you'd have to have those two and then these four, and then you'd overshoot the 6.
Excellent, exactly right.
So this one is not black, so this one is white. Nice.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool.
And note how that immediately limits the 10, right? Before this, we were saying the 10 can, we didn't really know how many it was going to see in its row. Now, because the 6 is so constrained, we know the 10 either sees exactly 5 or 6, but not more than 6, because it's going to cause problems for the 6 that it is now attached to. So that, again, and whenever we learn something about a given horizontally, it allows us to think about what effect that has on that same given operating vertically.
Yes. So one question I have to start off another contradiction based on what Roger was saying. What if we make this one white?
You have an issue with the 6, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It's not just that 6, but the one below it, right?
This needs to be black.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that needs to be black?
Well, this
Well, and this.
the one surrounded by the 8 and the 10.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Oh,
is that
and
allowed?
that's the island.
Good.
Right, so that's a contradiction.
So if we make this square white, we reach a contradiction. So we know this square has to be black.
And then that means that this needs to be white, and then and then the next one needs to be black.
Good.
Does everyone
And the square above the black one needs to be black so that you can escape.
Good. Very
can
good.
you show which black one? Oh, up here?
I'm on mobile, so it's a little tough, but the middle, the middle black one.
Yeah, nice, nice. Does this make sense to everyone so far? We just did a bunch of things. So anyone not need a recap about what just happened?
Well, I'm confused about the 6 now. I thought you said that the numbered square didn't count toward the overall count, but the 6 can see the guy below it.
It does
as 1.
count.
Oh, it does
Or it
count.
counts
Sorry.
as 1.
Okay.
You don't double count.
It counts as 1. Okay. Then it makes sense.
I feel like the 2 is always the one I think about when I try to remember that. The 2 is the smallest legal clue in a
Right.
non-trivial cave puzzle, and it's always itself and one other square.
Cool. Yes, we got these ones done. If no one has a place on the board they want to look, we can go in many different directions. But I would say this is an interesting spot to look as well. Or that might be a lie. Maybe it's not that interesting.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I was just looking there and I realized it doesn't. It would need to be like this or this needs to be black, but not both. But
yeah, so let's do an example if we make one of them black. Which one would you like to try?
Let's do the corner.
The corner? Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we'll see if these are conclusive or not. So if we do this, does anything happen here? Maybe with the 4.
well, it means that this needs to be black, and oh wait, no, never mind.
So if we assume this one here, and we made this spot white.
Actually, yeah, that needs to be black, and that needs
far.
to be white. Yeah.
So again, this is not a true necessary piece because we haven't proven that this corner has to be black, But if we assume that it is, then this is a contradiction. So this one needs to be black here. So if we do this, our 6 needs to go like this, and I'm going to stop going too far because we might be able to deduce things from here and eventually find a contradiction. But I don't want to do too much and forget the different pieces that we had. So let's see. I believe it was like this. Now let's try.
We can be more conclusive here, because if this
Sure.
is black, then this needs to go out to 6, but then it goes to 7, so that violates, which means that this cannot be black.
Yes. Nice. So this one's white. That's a good find. Nice job.
Which means that this and this are black.
Because if they were, are
Because of
both
the
of them?
4.
The 4's
Because of the
already satisfied.
All right. Nice.
Should we talk about like creating these just with limited time, or?
This is white because of the 4, and then this is black
Yeah.
because of the 4.
And this needs to be black.
Yeah.
Actually,
can you
wait, no,
explain
never
why
mind. It does
then?
not need to be black.
No, you're right that you're actually right that it does. And this is a
Oh
really
yeah, because I was
interesting
thinking like, it can go like this, but oh no, it can still go like this.
Well, let's look at that
Exactly.
case. Let's make this white.
All right, actually, these two don't need to be, but
Yeah, that's fine. We'll take these out. But even in this case, look, this
oh
is
yeah,
super interesting. We just
oh
tracked the
yeah,
white. And this is a pattern that was, I thought, really fascinating when I first saw this. Anytime you have 2 blacks, let's just make this gray, for example. 2 blacks on a diagonal. There's a white somewhere. You know this one has to be black. Regardless of how many different paths there are, even if you could have some black path go up and to the left. Just because if this is not black, it's cutting.
I'm
It's
not
set
sure I
to-
see why that is, because if the black went this way, whoops, then the white could connect here. Oh, but then it's trapped. Yeah, then this white can't connect up here. Yeah, that's true.
Yes. Diagonals like this, where you have a checkerboard of white and black, always cause disconnections. I don't really know how to explain it very well. I'm hoping Roger's a better one, but it is a thing.
Right. As you say, it's one of the key realizations that you make usually early when you're trying to figure out cave puzzles. It sort of comes from topology. If you think about it, if you have 2 whites and 2 blacks in a checkerboard pattern in this 2x2 square, we've already said the 2 whites are connected because all whites are connected in the final puzzle. So if you think about the topology of the plane, they either have to connect sort of this way or that way. And there's no way those 2 whites can connect without encircling one of the blacks. And by encircling one of the blacks, you cause a problem. So there's this neat topological result that says you can never have these 2x2 checkerboards. And you have to, so you get, and that again is key to many of the harder puzzles, is you fill in 3 of the cells and that tells you what the 4th one has to be, and that lets you make progress on the next spot, etc.
Yes, perfect.
So this maybe leads into a good overarching question about puzzle making, if it's okay to ask something like that, which is that maybe more than most puzzle makers, I would say that your audience is pretty mathematically educated. Jacob and I have encountered a number of people who have like PhDs in topology who do your puzzles for fun, and also like a number of people who will write fairly sophisticated code to solve some of your puzzles. And I wonder if those facts influence your puzzle making at all. Like, do you think about kind of the savviness of your audience a little bit, or do you just kind of make puzzles that are fun to you and not really worry about that too much?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think I've thought about it much, but I would say it's more the latter, right? Like I don't, even though it's sort of interesting. There's often a lot of math theory undergirding these puzzles, like why they work and why certain configurations lead to more interesting puzzle solves than other ones. But it doesn't feel like math when you're doing it, I would say, is almost always true, right? Like puzzle solving feels like its own activity. It's a lot of this constraint propagation and search, like Jacob said, searching for the next place to make progress, figuring out what effect the thing you just drew has on the other constraints that you're tracking, trying to keep those all straight. sometimes trying to look a little bit ahead. This argument by contradiction comes up a lot of if I do this, then other things happen, which is sort of math adjacent. But there, I don't make the real. So some of these puzzles, like you've probably seen if you've played around with Sudoku a lot of people will do very, very mathematical Sudoku variations where rather than just the numbers having to be unique, there's constraints on the sums or the products or uh, other more arithmetical things. Those can lead to more theoretical deductions where you sort of are not looking locally, but sort of have to think globally or about the whole puzzle and say maybe there's an interesting thing that a lot of puzzles types are susceptible to, not cave so much, but a lot of the other types are susceptible to parity arguments. It turns out if you solve a lot of puzzles, you get very familiar with parity. Oftentimes you can say, because there's an odd number and even number of things in this area, even though they may be far apart, it's going to force some action elsewhere in the grid. So getting comfortable with that and other sort of modular, maybe a mod 3 argument, a mod 4 argument, depending on the type of puzzle you're doing, can come into play. But I don't think it does a ton in caves in particular. For caves, it's a lot of just these numbers pushing on each other because some want to be big and some want to be small, and the whole cave wants to be connected. And those are sort of the push and pull, the constraints that you feel whether you're constructing it or solving it. I see you guys are making good progress on the solve. That's often how these things go. Is once you crack into it and start making a little progress, it cascades quickly. As you can see, once you have some solid information in the middle of the grid, now the big numbers are very constrained and they're going to push out in ways that are going to be constrained by the other numbers. It's interesting looking. Right, I remember at the beginning, Max, you sort of said, "Oh, the upper right looks like a good place to start because there's a lot of givens there." As you can see, we've solved most of the puzzle. And we haven't even really touched the upper right yet. So, and I think that goes back to what Jacob said about even me as someone who's fairly versed in puzzle type, I don't have a lot of intuition for what order the solve is going to progress in when I look at a new puzzle. It can be very finicky, and also as I construct these, they go through a lot of iterations, right? I'm going to tweak a number, move a number, solve it, tweak a number, solve it again. And it can be very interesting, even to me, to watch how the solve order changes, right? By changing one number, it can entirely flip the the order that the grid solves it. Now, instead of going lower left around a lower right, maybe the whole thing reverses and the best starting constraints now in the lower right and pushes around to the lower left. And that can happen because basically you're setting up these chains of inference where this clue can operate in a few different ways, and the way it operates is going to depend on this clue, which is going to depend on this clue, which is going to depend on this clue. And then at some point you're going to have, it's almost like physics. You're going to have a force at one end or the other that's going to cause all those either all the dominoes are going to fall left or all the dominoes are going to fall right. And small changes to the opening configuration can wind up totally reversing the solve, and now everything propagates the way you didn't think it was going to go. So it's
somehow the caves form some chaotic system. I don't know how, but I love it.
It does, and a lot of that has to do with the uniqueness, and that, like, if we were just throwing random numbers into the grid, none of this would happen, right? Like either there could be some relation between them, but it wouldn't be as finely balanced, right? It's sort of the uniqueness argument that that it puts everything on a knife edge and says there's exactly one way that you can simultaneously satisfy all these constraints.
So in his interactive theorem proving class at Northeastern, Pete has his students do a homework assignment where they build a Sudoku solver using Z3. And you do it like inside of the theorem prover because there's hooks for Z3 in the theorem prover, and then you prove that the thing is sound and complete. And then there's a bonus question, which is like a really cute bonus question, which is what is the hardest and what is the easiest Sudoku puzzle for your solver? And the like surprising answer, if you haven't done this sort of thing before, is that the empty board is by far the hardest, right? Because it's got the largest number of constraints. And of course,
Sure.
then it's this enormous Boolean equation that the thing is just chugging and chugging and chugging on. And meanwhile, you Google like hardest Sudoku board in the world, and you know, Z3 gets in like a picosecond the answer to the thing. So I wonder, do you have any like funny experiences building these like solvers and constructors where there's counterintuitive aspects to what's kind of easy or difficult for the computer to reckon with?
Yeah, so one of the things I still remember learning when I set about doing this, and this is a while ago because I've been constructing these, including computer-aided construction, for a long time now. But I was surprised at so I would say my first thought was, well, I'm gonna keep adding givens until the solution's unique. That's sort of a basic way to construct puzzles, right? I'm gonna throw some givens in. I'm gonna try and solve from there. If it's not unique, I'll just add more givens, and I'll add more givens. I'll add more givens if it's until it's unique. And then once it's unique, maybe then I'll stop and take a, well, I can also then at that point maybe see if some of the givens I had put in before I could remove, but I'll also stop and take a look at how difficult it is. So I was surprised by what I found. If you just do that, if you just sort of stop when it's unique and then check to see where you are, it was like almost always insanely hard, right? Like hard to the point where a human could not solve it, right? It required branching so deep that the computer didn't really have a problem with it, but a human couldn't do it like in any amount of reasonable time. Like you have to branch and sub branch and sub branch to find contradictions, and you really just couldn't do it by hand. And I wasn't expecting that, maybe because I had never seen a puzzle so hard, because you would never put one out for humans to solve. But it turns out, and after a decade of playing with the program, I can sort of confirm that left to its own devices, a randomly generated unique cave puzzle will actually be almost certainly too hard for a human to solve. So in addition to worrying about the aesthetics and the symmetry and the grid look and the uniqueness, another thing you have to pay a lot of attention to is the difficulty. So usually you're going to add more givens than are strictly necessary to force a unique solution, to bring it down into the level where it's human solvable. And part of the interesting part for me of writing the solver was thinking about what does it mean for a puzzle to be human solvable? There's this totally separate thing you're trying to measure, from like how many solutions does this grid have to how complex is it to find the solutions. So that the program has to be able to accurately model a human solving process to understand the difference between an easy cave and a hard cave. Otherwise, we'd have no idea. So you may be interested to find. And I took a look at my code the other day because, again, it's been like 10 years since I wrote this. So I hadn't looked at it in a while. But I actually wrote 2 solving loops in the program. I'm not going to. You don't want to see my program. My programming is awful. I'm not a programmer. If you guys are interested in this stuff, the site I would encourage you to check out, I'll put it in the chat. There's a site called knock.solutions, which I think has some really elegant puzzle solving software. It's been written by folks who are not me and know what they're doing. But so it has a cave solver amongst many other genres. But so in my code, I actually have 2 solvers. I have a fast solver and a slow solver. So what happens when I make a puzzle is I first start using the fast solver, and both solvers work the same way with one big difference, right? So that both will make these passes. So each pass, they're going to go through the grid and try to make what I call atomic deductions. There's basically 3 kinds of atomic deductions you can make. One is to look at a given and see, do I need a certain square to be white or a certain square to be black, or I'm going to break this given, right? Because maybe I'm constrained on 3 of the sides, so I need to grow in the direction of the 4th side. Or maybe not, maybe the opposite. Maybe I've already filled myself, so I need to put black squares around me so I don't go too far. The second is the 2x2 deduction that we just talked about. So if I have 3 of the 4 cells of a 2x2, I need that 4th one. And the third has to do with the connectedness, right? Making sure I'm not disconnecting any whites or disconnecting any blacks. And if there's a cell I could add that would either cut the whites apart from one another or strand a group of blacks from reaching the edge, then I know that I can't do that. So there's basically these three atomic deductions. And what the solver does is goes through, tries to do as many of those as it can. If it does at least one, then it's going to come back and do a second pass, do as many as it can on the new grid. And it's going to repeat that until it can't do any more. And then either the puzzle's broken, in which case you can report that it has no solutions, or the puzzle's done, in which case you can report it had a unique solution, or you haven't finished yet, you still have some indeterminate cells, and of course you have to branch there. So the difference between the fast and the slow solver is the fast solver just picks, I think relatively arbitrarily, some spot, and then just branches and then solves both sub puzzles from there, which is nice. It's fast, and it can quickly tell you whether a thing is unique or not, or how many solutions it has, but it doesn't give you a good feel for whether it was hard or not, right? Maybe it just picked the wrong point to branch and it went off on some terrible path that no human would have gone on, but it's fine for the fast solve, right? Usually, so basically the fast solve can quickly tell you how many solutions you have, but doesn't tell you anything about the complexity of the search to get there. So basically the program will sort of get you to a decent state with the fast solve and then switch over to the slow solve. And for the slow solve, it's the same thing, except when your passes sort of die and you now need to branch, it's going to check all possible branch points and say for every remaining indeterminate square in the grid, what would happen if I branch there, and how quickly am I going to reach a contradiction on whichever end of the branch leads to a contradiction. So that's obviously a lot slower. There's a lot more branches to keep track of. It does this very rudimentary breadth first search where it's trying to check them all and try to find good places to stop. So it's a lot slower, but at the end of that, I at least can say it's found the minimum depth of branch path, right? It's found a solution along some path that involved the minimum possible branching. And that's basically what I use as my rubric for difficulty. So I've even converted it to sort of star levels. If you think about, like, a lot of puzzle sites will have 1 star through 5-star difficulty levels. So for my cave program, it'll report as a 1-star puzzle anything that you can get to with only the atomic deductions, and specifically in only, I think it's 12 passes. So 12 passes through just atomic deductions. If it solves from that, you're a 1-star puzzle. If you solve just from atomic deductions, but takes more than 12 passes, that's a 2-star puzzle. If you have to branch, but the branches resolve themselves after only 1 pass, right? So you branch, but then on that first pass, you get a contradiction and can undo your branch. If there exists a solve path that only uses branches like that, then it's a 3-star puzzle. If it has a lot of those single depth contradictions, then it's a 4-star puzzle. And the hardest puzzle type that it sort of allows is you branch and then have to do 2 passes through the grid to find the contradiction. So essentially you're branching, the branch doesn't cause an immediate contradiction, but it causes things which themselves, at least one of, causes an immediate contradiction. And that, again, that threshold turned out to be lower than I thought it would be when I started this project. I thought, like, oh yeah, I as a human will be able to handle branching and then going out for a while before I find the contradiction. But it turns out that's really not true. I think that's basically the limit of what a solver can find is branch, step, and then contradiction. And even that is only I think a cave expert can do that. Somebody like Jacob at the end of the book, right? Because so the book proceeds from 1-star to 5-star puzzles. So in that last section, each of those puzzles would have required 1 or 2 places usually where you had to branch and go a couple steps before you find the contradiction. I don't know if that's how you found it or not, Jacob.
It is. No, it's really interesting hearing you talk about how you wrote the program, and it actually makes a lot of sense because if you miss, so that's exactly how I did find them. And if you miss any of these steps on the path, it hurts. You will feel it. And there are some puzzles that were like, I think in the 50s and the 70s where I didn't actually find the right way. And it took so much, I missed an idea, and it took so much work to find so many layers of these contradictions to still get to the answer. So it is really interesting. It does feel like you're kind of on the knife's edge of being able to keep taking a step forward over and over and solve it. And first of all, I'd just like to say congrats to people who solved this while everyone was talking. I was looking at what you were writing and just filling them in. So we solved our
Jared and
first
Daniel
puzzle
kicking
today.
ass.
Yeah, this was, I'll just take one moment to go say you should all buy this $10 book because I'm the only one on Goodreads with a 5-star review for Roger, and we need more of them. But another question I have, Roger, is a bit more general, and I don't want to ask too many things. We only have a few minutes left, and I want to let other people ask questions too. But I think today we all got really excited by doing this puzzle, and there's something that's really intrinsic and interesting about these cave puzzles. And I have my own perspective on what that is. I think that in cave puzzles and in good mathematics, there's sort of this notion of you have a whole bunch of tools you can try to apply in a creative way to take your next step. But then you can't really see the whole picture at once. But you also don't want it to just be completely intractable, right? I found Sudokus, it's often like really annoying to find the first thing, and then the second half of the puzzle is easy. And somehow, the way you've designed the cave puzzles feels like you can kind of get into this flow where each next step takes a decent amount of creativity. And I don't know if that's what you look for when you're designing puzzles, or if it's something else, or just a personal preference of mine, but that feels like it's at the heart of these things. And yeah, curious what your thoughts are, Roger, and what other people's thoughts are, and then any other questions after that too.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, right, we actually talk again in talking about the different aspects a puzzle can have. One of the interesting things we talk about is breadth of search. Not in the computer sense, but in the we call a puzzle a narrow puzzle if at any moment there's sort of only one place where it's possible to make progress. So some puzzles, especially cave puzzles, especially as they get harder, can be very narrow, where there's only one possible starting deduction, but and it can be a little tough to find sometimes, but once you find it, you sort of know the next deduction is going to have something to do with what you just did. So that sort of limits the search space, right? You're like, I just put in some effort to figure out that this particular square is white. It, it really can't tell me that much about some square that's far away on the other side of the grid. It's probably going to tell me something about the other squares that are either near it in that row and column, or et cetera, et cetera. So it sort of acts as a little signpost of the next thing you want to think about is probably here. And then you can do that, and that's going to trigger, a new thing, and that's going to have it act as its own signpost for where the next deduction is going to lie. So it sort of winds up forming this trail of breadcrumbs through the grid. That was another thing I learned, I think, through this project, was how predictable the solution path is, right? I think a lot of people, when you sit down and solve Sudokus and stuff, you don't think about the fact that is everyone finding the numbers in the same order that I'm finding them? And for many of the cave puzzles, it's really true that there's only, again, especially for the harder ones, there's only one path through. So if you tell me you're halfway through the puzzle, I can actually tell you exactly what your grid looks like, because there's only one possible way to be halfway through the puzzle. You must have figured out this, then this, then this, then this, and you're probably stuck on this deduction. So one of the things that was fun for me about writing this book is there's actually a section of hints at the end where I say, if you're stuck on this puzzle, this is probably the step you need to do next. And again, I don't know what your experience was, Jacob, but
It was accurate. I could not figure out how you did that at all until you explained how you wrote your solvers.
That's right. Sometimes I think it can feel like magic, having been on the other end of that, because you're like, how did this person know exactly where I was going to get stuck? But it's sort of computationally definable. This is the hard step of this puzzle. You're going to be able to get to here, and then you're going to get stuck. And the thing you need to realize is this exact deduction. Once you get that, you're going to sort of be fine from here to the end. Or maybe there's 2 stick points, and we'll have 2 hints for that puzzle at the back of the book. But turns out to actually be the solution path, the entire path turns out to be fairly predictable, which I think makes it a nice experience for the solver, right? You know that the thing you just did has to help you. So now figure out how it helps you.
Excuse me, Roger. Quick question. How did you ever think of this? How did it come upon you? I mean, hit by lightning, traffic accident, doing your doctoral thesis, and you thought, oh, as a moment, I'll come up with something that will be endlessly tormenting to other PhD folks like myself. Where did this come from?
So right. So and to be clear, I don't want to take credit for inventing the cave puzzle itself, right? The genre of cave puzzle uh, predated me. It was invented in Japan. It was popularized by a company there called Nikolai. So much like Sudoku and Kakuro and some of these other types, they have all these types out there, and I think they're very creative in coming up with new types, and many of them are sort of rearrangements of the same basic pieces, right? You're going to shade some things. There's going to be a loop. There's going to be things like that. But people are always impressing me with the number of different combinations. I've come up with a few types, but none that I'm particularly excited about. So I feel like my best work has been in writing puzzles within existing types, and that's yeah. So I what made me decide that I really wanted to first put a bunch of time into writing a cave solver and then, just write these puzzles. Once I had the solver, now it's fun, right? Like, so it took some time to write the solver. Again, I'm not really a coder, so there's a lot of pain there. But once I have the solver, which really doubles as a constructor, right? A solver and a constructor are very close to the same thing. But now it's fun. And if I have some free time, I can just, the way we're over time, so I don't have to wax poetic about this. But like the way I construct these, I use a process called carving, but I call it carving, where I basically just throw some random numbers into the grid, uh, jiggle things around a little bit until it solves uniquely. And now I'm left with a unique cave, but usually a bad cave, right? It's not symmetric. It's got numbers all over the place. Solution path might not be very interesting. And then I carve from there. I think of it like a sculptor looking at a block of wood and trying to see where's the interesting part of this and carve away the uninteresting parts. So I'll start moving numbers around. Again, constant resolving using the automated tools to try to see how the solution flow is changing, until lining up the givens so that they're all symmetric. If you look at the book, you'll see a lot of the puzzles are even more constrained than all even numbers. Maybe they'll be all 4s and 7s, or they'll be in specific consecutive patterns and stuff like that. But starting from sort of a random puzzle and trying to nudge it toward a puzzle I think will be interesting for humans to look at and solve is fun. And I do it, like I say, I was doing it long before I ever thought about publishing a book. I was just doing it because it amused me as a recreational mathematician to create these configurations that were uniquely solvable.
I love it. Oh yeah, go for it.
Oh, I was gonna say one thing I'll leave you with. I posted a link in the chat. This is again a cave for all of you to solve at your leisure. I think it's on the easy side. And if you look at it, if you look at the numbers in that grid, you should be able to make out a BCC in it. So created
that is
especially
awesome
for this engagement.
You made us a cave puzzle. Maybe we'll need to have another interactive solving group for that soon. Roger, this was so amazingly fun. I'm glad we got to solve one with everyone here. I think if you ever wanted to come back and talk about any of these things, it sounds like there's a lot of ground we didn't get to cover. So I think I can speak for everyone and say that would be amazing. So if you ever want to come back, let's do another one. And it could be interesting to see the process of actually making one. Maybe we could see some of your tools there or something like that, or even just solve another one interactively. And I guess before everyone goes, one interesting topic for the future is you talked about these sort of atomic rules for solving, and it really strikes me that this could blend with some other club interests where this is really like, from your axioms, it feels like some type of first order cave logic, and what would it mean to have some type of theorem prover for these cave puzzles too. So if anyone's interested in that, we should talk more afterwards and see what future events there should be, because
I would be super, super down to host like a hackathon in ACL2 and make a verified cave solver. That would be totally sick. So let's do it a follow on. This is a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Roger.
Yep. Have a nice day.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the questions, everybody. I'd be happy to come back. I'm always happy to talk puzzles. So thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you
so much.
Bye.
Thank you.